Hello, friends. Well, we want to talk just a little bit about the first 6 verses of 2 John today. Did you notice how many times John refers to the word truth? How many times he uses that word in these verses? So much is truth the theme of this letter that even the greeting is connected with it. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. And then he talks about truth and love in verse 3 as that which belongs in Jesus Christ, the Father's Son. And don't you like verse 4? I was overjoyed to find some of your children walking in the truth. John was over the moon by the fact that his children were walking in the truth. And of course, why wouldn't he be? Aren't we encouraged and overjoyed when our children are walking in the truth, whether or not they are our flesh and blood children or our spiritual children or the members of the church? And of course, that's what John is. That is who John is addressing here. He's addressing the members of a certain church. And he says, when I heard that your children are walking in the truth, I'm just overjoyed by that. Great source of joy. One of our questions, though, is what is the truth that John refers to in this letter? Is he just referring to truth in general, Christian truth in general, or is he referring to some specific truth? I think the latter in this context is more likely. I think what John is saying in 2 John is he's referring to the truth about Jesus and the practical implications that has for the conduct of those who believe in Jesus. So to follow the truth as John's readers had been commanded was to confess that Jesus had come in the flesh, to believe that, and to demonstrate that faith in a genuine love for others. John is overjoyed that his readers are living in those truths. I think that's what John is trying to tell us here. And let's briefly talk about love in these verses. Verse 5, let us love one another. Again, sounds like 1 John, doesn't it? Notice how the themes of 1 John are summarized in 2 John. Not just the theme of loving one another, but the theme of who Jesus is. That Jesus is God's Son, and that God's Son did come in the flesh. Yes, 2 John seems to encapsulate the themes of 1 John. But, verse 6, I like this too. This is love, that we walk according to His commandments. Isn't that an interesting phrase? This is love, that we live according to the commands of God. Now, what is John saying here? Love for one another is expressed in our keeping of the commandments of God. That is, to walk in the commandments is to walk in love. The commandments explain how we love each other. We don't lie, we don't steal, we don't cheat, we don't commit adultery. Why? Because these are ways that we demonstrate our love for one another. Now that's interesting to me because we can readily understand how keeping the commandments shows a love for God. But what John says here is that keeping the commandments shows or expresses our love for one another. Don't you find that interesting? I do too. So, in summary, what is John telling us in this passage? It is important that we walk in the truth. That we walk in the truth of who Jesus is, and that we walk in the truth of how He wants us to live. And it's important that we love one another, and it's important that we obey the commands of God in this context because that shows us how to love one another. The body of the message of 2 John is coming up in verses 7 through 11, and then we'll have the closing in verses 12 and 13. It's a short letter. The key question that's coming up in verse 9 in our reading in the next few days is this. Has to do with the teaching of Christ. What does John mean by the teaching of Christ? And here's the question that I want you to think about. Is the teaching of Christ, is that phrase an objective or a subjective genitive? I know you're going to be sitting on the edge of your seat until you hear the answer to that question. Well, we have a little fun, huh? In other words, is this a reference to Christ, the object of what is taught? Or is this a reference to Christ, the subject, or the one who is doing the teaching? Subjective, objective, genitive. We can have fun with it. I'll see you in a few days. Until then, enjoy your reading through 2 John. God bless.